Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Great to be diving in again.
Today, we're embarking on a pretty significant journey. We're tackling one of the most foundational and, let's be honest, often intimidating texts in philosophy, Martin Heidegger's Being and Time.
Yeah, it definitely has that
Yeah.
reputation, but it's incredibly rewarding once you start to grapple with it.
Okay, let's unpack this then. And just to set the stage, this isn't about memorizing complex German terms, although, yeah, we'll definitely encounter a few.
We will. They're often quite specific.
Right. But our mission is, well, it's bigger than that. It's about wrestling with these really profound questions about what it means to exist, what it means for you to be, and how time fundamentally shapes that very being.
Hmm.
We're going to dive deep into its core ideas, explore the really rich themes and philosophical thought in there, and hopefully raise some reflective questions that stick with you, questions that might prompt you to look at your own existence in a new light.
What's fascinating here is we're not just dissecting some old philosophical treatise. We're really engaging with a radically different way of thinking about existence itself.
Radically different. How so?
Well, this huge work, which he dedicated to Husserl, his mentor, it isn't meant to be like an academic lecture you just absorb passively.
Okay.
Instead, think of it as a guided journey. It takes you into concepts that really challenge our most basic assumptions about reality, about ourselves, and even about what truth means.
Right. Challenging assumptions seems key here.
Absolutely. We'll try to connect these dense, sometimes abstract philosophical ideas directly to our own everyday experience. That's really what Heidegger wanted to reorient philosophy by making what's closest to us, our own being, the most significant yet often overlooked subject of inquiry.
The most familiar thing, but the one we least understand.
Precisely. It's a challenging path, no doubt, but I think an incredibly rewarding one for understanding what it means for us right now to be, #tag1, the primacy of the question of being and the role of Dasein.
Okay, so let's jump right into the heart of it then. Heidegger's entire massive inquiry, the engine driving being and time, it all centers on one fundamental, yet as you said, often forgotten question. The meaning of being, with a capital B.
That capital B is crucial.
Yeah. And it's not just a casual word here, is it? Like saying something is a chair. It's not some trivial question we can just brush aside as obvious.
Not at all. He argues it underpins literally everything. All understanding, all science, all our interactions with the world. Think about it. Everything we talk about, everything we relate to, any entity we encounter.
Yeah.
It's in being in some way.
Right. Okay.
But as you prompted the listener, have you ever really paused to consider what being truly means beyond just existing or being present in a room?
Probably not deeply. We kind of operate with this assumed vague understanding, right? But we rarely dig into what that isness actually implies.
Exactly. And Heidegger says that's the core problem. We've forgotten the question itself.
So how does he start to tackle it? Where do we begin?
He starts with a really crucial foundational distinction. It's between being, capital B, Sein in German, and beings, lowercase b, signed. Getting this is maybe the most critical first step.
Okay, being versus beings. What's the difference?
Think of it like this. Being isn't itself a being. It's not another thing that exists alongside tables, trees, or you and me.
So it's not like the biggest being or God or something like that.
No, exactly. That's the trap traditional philosophy often falls into, he argues. Being is what determines beings as beings. It's the condition that makes it possible for anything to be at all. You could almost think of it like the light that illuminates everything that is, but isn't itself one of the illuminated objects.
Ah, okay. So it transcends any specific thing. It's the isness itself.
The isness, that's a good way to put it. And traditional philosophy, he contends, often commits this fundamental error, what he calls the forgetting of being. It reduces being to maybe a super being, like a supreme God or a universal substance, or it just treats being as another property of beings, like redness is a property of an apple.
Yeah.
He critiques this tendency, sometimes calling it telling a story. Mythontina diestai, drawing from Plato about origins, like trying to explain being by pointing to some ultimate being. But that misses the essence of being itself, treating it as just another possible entity within the world, rather than the very horizon that makes any world possible in the first place.
So it's not entirely alien to us, this being?
No, that's the interesting part. He says we always possess an average, vague, sort of pre-ontological understanding of it in our everyday lives. We use the verb to be constantly. We understand is, but it's initially elusive, unfamiliar, yet ungraspable when we try to pin it down explicitly. That's why a rigorous inquiry is needed.
Right. So if being isn't a being, how do we investigate it? Where's the access point?
This leads us straight to Heidegger's unique and, yeah, for many, quite challenging starting point, the entity he calls Dasein.
Dasein. Okay, that's the famous term. It sounds a bit strange. Why that word?
It is unusual, and he chose it very deliberately. He wanted to avoid all the ingrained conceptual baggage that comes with traditional terms like human being, subject, consciousness, mind, person.
So don't think of Dasein as just human being in a biological sense.
Exactly, or even in a purely psychological sense. And definitely not as the simple subject like Descartes' thinking thing. A better way to approach it perhaps is the being for whom being is an issue. It's us, but seen in a radically different light, trying to strip away those conventional philosophical assumptions first.
The being for whom being is an issue.
That's interesting. So our own existence matters to us in a way it doesn't for, say, a rock.
Precisely. That's absolutely crucial, and it's why Dasein is the necessary starting point. Dasein has what Heidegger calls ontological priority.
Ontological priority. Okay, break that down.
Ontic refers to facts about beings, their properties. Ontological refers to the being of beings, their structure of existence. Dasein has priority because it's not just one being among others. It's the only being that, by its very nature itself, asks the question of being. Because being is an issue for it.
Yes. Its own being is an issue for it. It has this fundamental quality that it is concerned in its being about that being. It doesn't just have being. Its very way of being is about it being. It cares about its own existence, its possibilities.
And that's why he avoids terms like subject or person, because they carry assumptions.
Exactly. He meticulously avoids subject, I, reason, spirit, person, human being, life. Because these terms, he argues, carry all this traditional, ontologically undetermined baggage.
Undetermined baggage.
Meaning, philosophies often use these terms without first asking, what is the being of a subject? What kind of being is consciousness? Take Descartes' res cogiton, the thinking substance. Descartes starts by assuming the self-evidence of thinking, or the I think, without first properly inquiring into the being of that thinking entity itself.
He just assumes the I is clear.
Right. Heidegger says we must first understand the kind of being that can think or be a subject, rather than taking these capacities as foundational givens whose own mode of being is already obvious. These traditional terms often just fail to ask about the being of the entities they designate.
So Dasein is meant to be a neutral term for us.
It signifies the specific being that we ourselves are, and crucially, its particular kind of being. Dasein is not present at hand, forehand in height, like a tool just lying there, or a rock simply existing without questioning its existence. Dasein exists. It's characterized by its existence, which for Heidegger means its ability to relate to its own being, to understand it, and to choose among possibilities for its being.
It's defined by its possibilities.
In a large part, yes. So, here's a question for you listening. How does thinking of yourself not as a fixed human being or a subject with set qualities, but as Dasein, this being for whom its own being matters, a being always unfolding into possibilities, always in question, how might that change your perspective on your own existence, your choices, your very nature?
That definitely shifts things. It makes existence feel less like a noun and more like a verb. Okay, this is already huge. Trying to understand being itself, using this unique entity, Dasein, as the starting point, because being matters to it. It feels like a profoundly intricate undertaking.
It is deeply intricate.
So how exactly does Heidegger propose we do this? How do we approach this inquiry into being in Dasein? You mentioned his method earlier, Phenomenology. Here's where it gets really interesting, you said.
Yeah.
Because it's not just another school of thought.
Right. It's absolutely key to understand that for Heidegger, in Being and Time, phenomenology isn't primarily a set of doctrines or philosophical positions. It's fundamentally about the how. It's the method of the research.
The how, not the what. Okay.
It's a way of conducting the inquiry, a specific approach. And the core idea, the maxim often associated with Husserl, but central for Heidegger too, is to the things themselves.
Let the things speak for themselves.
Exactly. Let things show themselves from themselves, as they are in themselves, without us imposing our preconceived notions, our theories, our frameworks onto them first. It's about trying to encounter the phenomena directly.
Okay, so how does that work? How do we let things show themselves?
To get a grip on his specific use of phenomenology, we need to break down the word itself, looking at its Greek roots. He focuses on three key components: phenomenon, logos, and aletheia.
Phenomena, logos, aletheia.
Right. So first, phenomenon from the Greek phenomena. This literally means that which shows itself in itself. It's a distinctive way something can be encountered, how it appears.
So it's just appearance.
Not quite mere appearance. It's crucial to distinguish it from appearance in the sense of something's superficial or semblance, which can actually cover things up or distort them. A phenomenon is the thing showing itself.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about, say, seeing someone blush. The redness of their face is the phenomena. It's what shows itself directly. We might interpret it as embarrassment or a sign of fever. Those are interpretations or underlying causes that aren't directly showing themselves in the same way the redness is. The phenomenon isn't what's behind the appearance. It is the appearing, the self-showing.
Okay, the self-showing, got it. What about logos? We usually translate that as reason or speech.
Right, but Heidegger goes back to what he sees as its more primordial meaning. For him, logos means dilon, to make manifest, or epiphanestai, to let something be seen.
Making manifest, letting be seen.
Yes. So genuine speech, genuine logos, isn't just about stringing words together logically. It derives from what is being talked about, and its function is to make that thing manifest, to let it be seen, to reveal it. It's fundamentally about disclosure.
So speech reveals phenomena.
Ideally, yes. And that leads directly to the third term, aletheia. This is the Greek word usually translated as truth, but Heidegger gives it a radical reinterpretation.
Not just truth as correctness, like my statement matches the fact.
Exactly. That's the traditional idea adequatio agreement. For Heidegger, the more primordial meaning of aletheia is unconcealment. Literally, aletheia, taking something out of hiddenness.
Unconcealment.
Yeah.
Wow. So truth is about things coming out of hiding.
Yes. It's a process, an event of disclosure. He argues that even for the Greeks, things like aesthesis, direct sense perception, or no cortis observant apprehension, were considered more originally true than the logos, speech judgment, because they are modes of discovering, of unconcealing, that don't immediately involve the potential for covering up that comes with combining things in a statement. Logos, because it synthesizes and asserts, also holds the possibility of distortion, of covering things over.
That's a really different way to think about truth.
It is.
Yeah.
And it leads to a reflective question. If truth is fundamentally about uncovering, this event of things emerging from hiddenness, what might that imply about how we usually seek or claim to possess truth? Often we're content with quick answers, easy labels, things that feel certain but maybe haven't really been unconcealed.
It suggests truth is maybe less about having a final answer and more about keeping things open to reveal themselves.
Something like that. It implies truth is an ongoing process, tied to this act of unconcealing.
So if truth is unconcealment, then this method, phenomenology, becomes vital precisely because things aren't always unconcealed. They're often hidden.
Exactly that. Phenomenology is necessary precisely because phenomena are initially, and for the most part, concealed. They're covered up.
How so? In what ways?
Well, a phenomenon might be completely undiscovered. We just don't know about it yet. Or it could be buried over, maybe it was once known or understood, but tradition, habit, or subsequent theories have covered it up, forgotten it. Think about his claim about the meaning of being itself being buried over.
Okay. Undiscovered or buried.
But he says the most dangerous kind of concealment is distortion. This is when something covered up is presented as if it's familiar, obvious, and easily accessible. But this familiarity is misleading. It actively prevents us from seeing the thing as it truly is because we think we already grasp it.
Like thinking we know what time is just because we use clocks.
That's a perfect example. Or thinking we know what being means because we use the word is. The familiarity masks a deep lack of understanding. So phenomenology is this necessary, often difficult work of uncovering what's concealed in all these ways, undiscovered, buried, or distorted, to allow the phenomena to genuinely show themselves in their own truth.
So it all comes back to that imperative, to the things themselves. It's not about forcing our ideas onto the world, but about this rigorous, patient listening, allowing things to reveal their own being. A fundamental shift in how we approach knowing anything.
A fundamental shift, precisely. It demands a certain kind of intellectual humility, an openness to being surprised by what shows itself.
All right, so we have Dasein as our starting point, and phenomenology as our method of letting things show themselves. Now let's turn to Dasein's most fundamental characteristic, a concept that's absolutely central to being and time, being in the world.
In der Weltsein, yes. Utterly central.
Now this phrase, being in the world, it sounds kind of simple, almost intuitive, right? We're all in the world. But you cautioned earlier against misunderstanding this in just a normal spatial sense. So what does this all mean? Why is it so foundational?
It's absolutely vital we don't take it spatially. Being in the world is an existential characteristic of Dasein. It describes its fundamental mode of being, not its location.
Okay, so not like water in a glass or me in this room right now.
Exactly. That kind of insideness, he calls it in Wendigkeit, is a spatial relationship. It describes how objects, things that are merely present at hand, are located relative to each other. Water is in the glass, the chair is in the room.
Right.
Dasein's minuteness is totally different. It signifies a fundamental involvement, an essential familiarity, a kind of dwelling. Dasein is always already immersed, engaged, absorbed, and disclosed within a world. It's about belonging to a world.
Okay, involvement, familiarity, dwelling. And what about the world part? Is that just the planet Earth or the collection of all objects?
No, world for Heidegger isn't primarily the sum total of all the things that exist, like rocks and trees and stars. The world is disclosed with Dasein. It's the wherein Dasein lives. Think of it as the meaningful context, the horizon of significance, the pre-understood background against which beings are encountered and become intelligible to us.
The meaningful context.
Yes, and this world is always predisclosed for Dasein's circumspect heedfulness. That means we already have a certain understanding of it, a feel for its significance, before we even consciously focus on individual things within it. We walk into a room and we immediately have a sense of it as a kitchen or as an office before we inventory every object.
We grasp the whole context first.
In a way, yes. And furthermore, he makes this really radical claim. Dasein is its there, the Da in Dasein.
Dasein is it's there. What does that mean?
The Da signifies this there being, this open region where Dasein exists and where beings can be encountered. Dasein isn't just located at a there, it is the there. It's not illuminated by some external light source like a spotlight hitting an object. Instead, Dasein is itself the clearing.
The clearing, Lichtung in German.
Exactly, Lichtung.
Yeah.
Dasein is this open space, this lit-up region, this existential clearing that it opens up simply by existing. And it's this clearing that Dasein is that makes everything else objectively present things, the world in its meaningfulness accessible to us in the first place. Whether things show up clearly or remain hidden, it's within this clearing that they appear or withdraw.
Wow. So we aren't just observers in the world. Our very being is the openness that allows a world to show up for us at all.
That's the radical idea. We are the condition for the possibility of encountering anything. So think about this. How does that idea, the idea of you being the clearing that makes the world accessible, rather than just a passive observer inside it, change your understanding of your own role in reality?
Yeah.
It suggests a much more active, constitutive relationship with everything around you.
It puts us right at the center, but not in an egotistical way. More like we're the space where things can happen. Okay, so within this clearing, this world disclosed with Dasein, how do we actually encounter the specific things around us in our day-to-day lives? You mentioned circumspect heedfulness.
Right. Within this fundamental being in the world, Heidegger makes another critical distinction about how we encounter beings. There are two primary modes, handiness, Zuhandenheit, and objective presence, Vorhandenheit.
Handiness and objective presence.
And the crucial point is that handiness is the primary way we encounter things. Most fundamentally, things show up for us as useful things at hand, as equipment.
Like a hammer.
A hammer is the classic example, or a pen, a keyboard, a door handle. We don't primarily encounter a hammer as, say, a specific weight of metal and wood with certain geometric properties.
No, you just pick it up and use it.
Exactly. We encounter it in terms of its in order to relationship within a larger totality of relevances. Bewantness. The hammer is for hammering nails, which is for building a shelf, which is for holding books, which is for, well, whatever purpose Dasein has. This whole interconnected web of equipment, purposes, references, that's the totality of relevance. It's what makes the hammer understandable as a useful thing in the first place.
It only makes sense within that network of purposes.
Precisely. And when things are functioning properly, when they're handy, they're usually unobtrusive or inconspicuous. They kind of recede into their function. When you're hammering effectively, you're not focused on the hammer itself. You're focused on the task, the nail, the wood. The hammer virtually disappears into its use.
Right. You only notice it when something goes wrong.
That's exactly when handiness becomes conspicuous. When things break down. When the hammer is too heavy for the job, or the head is loose, or the pen runs out of ink, or the car won't start, suddenly the tool draws attention to itself. Its handiness becomes obstinate, unusable. And it's often at this point of breakdown, when it ceases to be seamlessly useful, that we might shift our perspective and start seeing it as objectively present.
Ah, okay. So objective presence comes after handiness in a way.
It's a derivative mode of encountering beings, he argues. Objective presence for hand and height is when we see things as merely present at hand, detached from their context of use, stripped of their meaningful connections within the world, viewed as objects with properties.
Like how science might look at a hammer, its mass, material composition, etc.
Yes, that theoretical or scientific gaze often focuses on objective presence. It analyzes objects in terms of measurable properties, physical composition, independent of any human purpose or involvement. Heidegger acknowledges this is useful for certain aims, but he argues it fundamentally deprives things of their worldliness. It obscures their more primordial way of being, which is as handy equipment integrated into our lives.
And this connects to his critique of someone like Descartes.
Directly. Descartes famously defined the essence of the physical world as res extensa extended substance, basically matter occupying space, defined by geometric and quantifiable properties. For Heidegger, this is a prime example of focusing only on objective presence. He sees it as an ontologically insufficient way of understanding beings, because it fails to grasp their being from their source, which is Dasein's practical, circumspect engagement within its world, where things first show up as useful.
It misses the primary way we relate to things.
It misses the worldliness of things. Think about driving a car. When it's running smoothly, you're not thinking about the spark plugs, the engine cylinders, the brake fluid viscosity. You're just using the car to get somewhere. That's handiness.
Right.
But when it breaks down on the side of the road, suddenly you might start seeing the engine as this collection of distinct, objectively present parts, belts, hoses, wires that aren't working together anymore.
Yeah.
The breakdown forces a shift from handiness to objective presence.
That makes sense. So here's a question. How much of our everyday experience, if we really pay attention, involves things showing up as at hand for some purpose, woven into our projects, versus showing up as objectively present, just detached objects?
It's a great question. Heidegger suggests the at hand is far more pervasive, the very fabric of our daily lives, even if we don't always notice it.
Okay, so Dasein is fundamentally being in the world, primarily encountering things as handy, useful equipment within a web of purposes. But this world isn't just Dasein and its tools, right? It's not an empty stage, it's populated.
Absolutely. The world Dasein inhabits is fundamentally a shared world.
Which brings us to the inherently social dimension of our existence. Heidegger emphasizes, doesn't he, that we're never truly isolated individuals. Being with others is woven right into our being.
That's exactly right. Being with others, Mitsein and Co-Dasein, Mitsein, are not just things that happen sometimes, like when we decide to have a conversation. They are essential existential characteristics of Dasein's constitution. Being with is part of what Dasein is.
So it's not like I first figure out who I am in isolation and then I encounter others.
No, that's the traditional picture he wants to dismantle. Others are encountered from out of the world in which Dasein already dwells. They are part of the context, encountered in our everyday involvement and circumspection. We encounter others as fellow Dasein within the shared world.
So Dasein is essentially for the sake of others, even when trying to avoid them.
Yes, in a fundamental structural sense. Even in solitude, or in modes of deficient relating, like ignoring or avoiding others, Dasein is still in a mode of being with. Its existence is shaped by the fact that the world is shared. This pre-existing disclosedness of others is part of what constitutes the world's significance and makes it intelligible. The world is always already a mitwelt, a with world.
A with world, okay. And this shared existence, this fundamental being with, it takes on a particular flavor in our everyday lives, doesn't it? It's not always this explicit, authentic encounter. Often it feels more anonymous, pervasive but subtle.
Oh, absolutely. Its most common, most pervasive form is often quite anonymous. Dasein exists primarily, and for the most part, in the mode of what Heidegger calls the they-das man.
Das man. They, okay, this sounds a bit ominous maybe. Is it like Big Brother or some controlling force?
It can feel like that sometimes, but it's important not to personify it too much. It isn't a specific person or a particular group plotting against us or some kind of evil entity. It's more like an impersonal, anonymous public mode of being that tends to dominate our everyday lives.
The public mode, like what people say.
Exactly like that. It's the one that does things, thinks things, feels things. One doesn't do that. One goes on holiday in August. One feels outraged about this. They say the economy is improving. Is the pervasive influence of public opinion, social norms, fashion, common sense, what everyone knows or does.
Okay, I think I get the feel of it. How does it operate?
Primarily through what he calls distantiality, Abständigkeit. This is an inherent tendency in our being with one another to maintain a certain distance, but also to constantly compare ourselves, to keep ourselves within the bounds of the average. It creates and maintains averageness.
Averageness. So it discourages standing out.
Yes, it subtly pressures towards conformity, and this leads to what he calls leveling down, Einebnung. The they tends to squash every priority. Anything primordial, unique, profound, or hard-won gets flattened into something long since known or already understood.
It makes everything mundane.
It can, yeah. Any genuine struggle or deep insight gets turned into commonplace chatter. Every mystery loses its power, becomes just another topic for discussion. Think about a powerful artistic experience or a deep personal insight that they might immediately categorize, oh yeah, that's a typical, or everyone feels that way sometimes.
Yeah.
Reducing its unique impact to a general, manageable opinion.
It strips the unique power away.
It can. And this publicness that arises from the they ends up controlling how the world and even how Dasein itself are interpreted. The they is always right.
Always right.
Not because it has genuine insights or understands things deeply, but precisely because it skillfully avoids the heart of the matter. It obscures complexity, glosses over difficulties, and then claims that this covered-over simplified version is familiar and accessible to everyone. It provides a comfortable but ultimately superficial understanding.
Comfortable but superficial.
And this has a really significant consequence. The disburdening of one's being. Because the A dictates how things are done, how things are seen, what matters. It takes over the responsibility for Dasein's existence. It makes choices for Dasein, relieving it of the weight, the anxiety of having to choose for itself, of forging its own path.
So we just go along with the flow, with what one does?
That's the tendency. And this is what Heidegger identifies as inauthenticity. It's a pervasive mode of dependency and self-forgetfulness. Dasein escapes the burden of its own unique possibilities by conforming to the general one, to Dasein.
But it's not like the they is nothing, it's real.
Oh, it's very real. He calls it a most everyday and stubborn reality of Dasein. It's not some external force imposing itself. It's a fundamental way Dasein exists, primarily and for the most part. It's almost unsettling how deeply ingrained it is, subtly shaping our tastes, our opinions, our worries, our aspirations, often without us even realizing it. It's not about being weak-willed. It's about a fundamental mode of existence getting absorbed in the public interpretation of the world.
Yeah, that is unsettling. So a question for you listening. Can you identify moments or areas in your own life where the they, what everyone thinks or does, might have dictated your possibilities, your interpretations, or even your moods, maybe subtly guiding your choices without you fully realizing it at the time?
It's a constant presence, that public interpretation. Recognizing it is the first step.
Okay, so Dasein is this clearing, always already in the world and fundamentally with others, often existing in the mode of the they. How then does Dasein actually find itself in this complex situation? How is its own existence disclosed to itself? It doesn't sound like a purely rational, calculating process. We often just feel a certain way about our situation, don't we?
Exactly. It's definitely not just rational calculation. A fundamental and absolutely irreducible way Dasein is disclosed to itself is through attunement Befindlichkeit. In everyday language, we might call this mood.
Mood. Like being happy or sad.
Yes, but it's deeper than just fleeting emotions. Dasein is always already in a mood, even feeling moodless or indifferent or flat. That is itself a mood, a way of being attuned that reveals something about our situation. Moods aren't just psychological states that happen to us. They are fundamental existential ways Dasein is disclosed to itself. They reveal its how it is, its wie einem ist, how it finds itself being there.
So moods tell us something fundamental about our existence.
Yes, they disclose our situation. Primarily, attunement discloses Dasein in its thrownness Geworfenheit.
Thrownness. We mentioned that before.
Right. It's the sheer, unchosen fact that Dasein always finds itself already in a particular world, a specific situation, with certain inherent possibilities, certain limitations, certain beings around it. We don't choose our birth, our parents, our historical era, our basic capacities. We are simply thrown into this existence, given over to our there. Moods are how we find ourselves in this thrownness.
So feeling cheerful or bored or anxious, these aren't just feelings about the world, they're ways we are in the world, revealing our thrown situation.
Precisely. They color our entire way of being there. And within this discussion of attunement, Heidegger makes another critical distinction, one that often gets blurred in everyday talk. The distinction between fearing, Furcht, and angst, usually translated as anxiety or dread.
Fear versus angst. What's the difference there?
Fearing is always directed at something specific within the world. It's a fear of something definite.
Like fear of spiders, or fear of failing an exam, or fear of a threat approaching.
Exactly. It's about inner-worldly threats, things we can identify. It involves awaiting something specific and threatening. It can manifest as alarm, horror, terror, depending on the nature of the threat. It's about specific dangers.
Okay, fear is of something specific. So what is angst?
Angst is profoundly different. It is not a fear of something specific in the world. Instead, angst is anxiety in the face of, well, being in the world itself. It's anxiety in the face of Dasein's own potentiality of being, its possibilities, its freedom, and ultimately its finitude.
Anxiety about existence itself.
Yes. More specifically, he links it to angst about one's own most non-relational possibility not to be bypassed, which, as we'll see later, is death. Angst reveals Dasein's fundamental uncanniness, Unheimlichkeit.
Uncanniness, like feeling spooky.
Not quite spooky. It literally means not being at home. Unheimlich. It's a profound existential disquiet, a sense that Dasein isn't ultimately at home in the familiar world it inhabits, despite all its routines and attachments.
Not at homeness, even in our own homes.
Even in the most familiar surroundings. It's this underlying sense that the ground beneath our feet isn't entirely solid, that our existence is fundamentally unsettled, contingent, finite. It's a feeling that emerges when the usual ways of understanding the world through the day they break down, and Dasein is confronted with itself, with its thrownness and its ultimate lack of absolute grounding. It's not fear of something, it's a deep unease about the sheer fact of existence and its limits.
Wow, that's a deep feeling.
It's a primordial attunement, he argues, that discloses our thrownness into finitude, into death, into the radical contingency of our being here at all.
So another question for you listening. How do your moods shape what you perceive, how you relate to the world, literally coloring your possibilities? And can you maybe sense a difference between specific fears, fear of this or that, and a more pervasive, maybe background hum of anxiety or uncanniness about existence itself?
That distinction is key to understanding Dasein's self-disclosure.
Okay, so that's attunement, the passive finding ourselves in a mood, revealing our thrownness. But Dasein isn't just passive, right? It actively makes sense of things. It strives towards goals. What does Heidegger mean by understanding? How does that relate to this moodiness?
Right. Dasein isn't just subjected to moods. It also actively engages with its possibilities through understanding Verstehen. For Heidegger, understanding isn't primarily about intellectual cognition or grasping facts. Fundamentally, Dasein understands by projecting Entwurf.
Projecting onto a screen?
Not quite. More like projecting itself forward on the possibilities of its being. Our existence is always ahead of itself, always oriented towards what it can be, what it might become. Understanding is grasping these possibilities for oneself.
So understanding is projecting possibilities.
Yes, but this projection isn't some kind of free-floating fantasy. It's always delivered over to the fact of thrownness. Our projections are shaped and limited by the actual situation we're thrown into, our history, our capabilities, our world. We project possibilities from within our thrownness.
Okay, so understanding is this situated projecting of possibilities. How does interpretation fit in?
Crucially, all understanding involves interpretation. Interpretation isn't something we add on later. It's inherent in understanding itself. Interpretation means seeing something as something.
The A structure.
The A structure, exactly. This is primordial. Even in simple, practical perception, before we make any explicit statements, we don't just see raw data. We see this as a hammer, that as a door, her as a colleague. The A's makes explicit the network of relevance, the in order to structure, through which we understand things in their handiness. It's not just added by language. It's there in our basic engagement.
It's built into how we perceive meaning.
Yes, and this leads directly to the concept of the hermeneutic circle.
Ah, the famous circle. Doesn't that mean we're always trapped in our own assumptions? A vicious circle.
It sounds like a vicious circle, circulus viciosus, doesn't it? The idea is that interpretation always operates within what we already understand. We need a forehaving, a prior familiarity with the context, a foresight, a particular way of looking and expectation, and for conception, our initial concepts or framework. We can only understand something based on what we already know.
Which sounds like we can never get outside our own biases.
But Heidegger argues it's not necessarily a vicious circle. Instead, he sees it as a positive possibility of primordial knowledge. It simply describes the existential force structure of Dasein, how our being is always already ahead of itself, always understanding from somewhere. The task isn't to magically leap out of the circle, which he thinks is impossible anyway.
So what's the task?
The task is to get in it in the right way. This means consciously engaging with our force structures, bringing them to light, and constantly testing and revising them against the things themselves. It's about letting the phenomena guide our interpretation and challenge our preconceptions, rather than just blindly imposing our existing framework.
So the circle isn't a prison, it's just the structure of understanding itself.
Exactly. It's the condition for understanding. So think about it. When you encounter something new, a new person, a challenging idea, a different culture, how much of your initial understanding is shaped by what you already foreknow or expect? And how can you become more aware of those foreconceptions, not to eliminate them, but to hold them more lightly, allowing you to be more open to what the new phenomenon is actually showing you?
That's a practical challenge, being aware of the circle we're always in. #6. Discourse, language, and falling prey. All right, so Dasein is always attuned, finding itself in a mood within its thrownness, and always understanding by projecting possibilities and interpreting things as something within the hermeneutic circle. How does this understanding, this interpretation, actually get articulated? How is it shared? This must involve language, right?
It does. The Heidegger makes a distinction here, too. He introduces discourse read as the fundamental articulation of Dasein's attuned intelligibility, its understanding of being in the world.
Discourse. Is that just another word for language or speech?
Not quite. For Heidegger, discourse is more fundamental. Discourse, as an existential structure of Dasein, is the ontological possibility of language. Language, as we normally think of it, words, grammar, sentences, something we use, is an interworldly being, a tool that is grounded in the more fundamental existential structure of discourse.
So discourse comes first, language follows.
Discourse is the underlying capacity for articulation itself. Its key components, what discourse is about, what is said, the act of communication, the function of making known, these are all rooted in Dasein's being, and they make language possible.
Okay. And how does hearing fit in?
Hearing is also understood existentially here. It's not just the physiological process of sound hitting eardrums, it's existentially constitutive for discourse. Dasein hears because it understands. It's an existential openness to the world and to others. Dasein listens to itself, think of the call of conscience we'll discuss later, and it listens to co-Dasein. This hearing, grounded in understanding, is what makes genuine communication and shared meaning possible.
So hearing is tied to understanding. What about making statements, like using language to say, this is X?
The statement logos, again, but now in the sense of assertion or proposition, has, according to Heidegger, three interconnected meanings rooted in discourse. First, and most fundamentally, it's about pointing out, aufzeigen. A statement primarily functions to let beings be seen from themselves. When you say the hammer is too heavy, you are, first and foremost, pointing to the hammer itself, making it manifest in a certain way. It's not primarily about conveying a mental picture in your head.
Okay. Pointing out the thing itself.
Second, there's predication. Predication. This is the grammatical structure determining a subject to the hammer by a predicate is too heavy. This is founded upon the pointing out. It specifies how the thing being pointed out is seen, highlighting a particular aspect.
Defining it in some way.
Right. And third, there's communication. Mitteilen. This is the sharing aspect, letting someone else see with us what we have pointed out and predicated. It establishes a shared view on the matter.
Pointing out, predicating, communicating. Makes sense. But you mentioned earlier that language, or logos, can also cover things up.
Yes, there's a critical danger inherent in the statement. The primordial as structure of our practical, circumspect interpretation, seeing the hammer as equipment for hammering, can get leveled down in the statement.
Leveled down? How?
The statement can easily detach the thing from its context of use, from the whole network of relevance, and reduce it to just a subject with properties, an objectively present thing. When we just say the hammer is heavy, without the context of trying to use it, the A's of its handiness can fade, and it becomes just an object with a property, stripped of its worldliness.
So language can both reveal and conceal, articulate and obscure.
Precisely. It's a double-edged sword.
And I imagine this tendency towards leveling down and obscuring becomes especially strong in the way we use language every day, particularly in the context of the they. This seems like it leads right into how Dasein can get lost.
Absolutely. This tendency is central to the phenomenon Heidegger calls falling prey for fallen. This describes how Dasein becomes absorbed, entangled, and lost in the world, and crucially, in the interpretations and norms of the they.
Falling prey for fallen. Is this like a moral fall, like falling into sin?
No, It's very important not to read it morally. It's not a fall from some previously pure or better state. It's an existential determination of factical Dasein. It's a fundamental tendency, a gravitational pull within Dasein's everyday existence. Dasein has, in a sense, fallen away from itself, from its own authentic possibilities, and become absorbed in the publicness of the day.
How does this falling prey manifest in our discourse, in how we talk and listen?
Heidegger identifies several key phenomena. First, idle talk. Gerd.
Idle talk, just gossip, chit-chat.
It includes that, but it's broader and more fundamental. He doesn't mean it necessarily in a purely disparaging way, like it's always bad. It's a positive phenomenon in the sense that it's a real structural part of how everyday Dasein understands and interprets things. It's the circulation of information and interpretations where things get passed along without anyone having a genuine first-hand understanding or grounding in the matter itself. It's an uprooted understanding.
Uprooted?
Yeah, cut off from primary, authentic relations to the world, to others, and to oneself. Idle talk closes off genuine questioning and deeper understanding because it operates under the presumption that everything is already understood, already known, because one says so or everyone knows. It obscures possibilities by making everything seem settled. It dictates how we initially get to know many things, often preventing us from going deeper.
So it's like repeating headlines without reading the article or having strong opinions based on hearsay.
That's a very contemporary example, yes. It shapes what and how one sees and feels without genuine engagement. Second, there's curiosity, nouji.
Curiosity sounds like a good thing, usually. Isn't it about wanting to know?
Again, Heidegger uses the term in a specific critical sense here. It's not genuine intellectual inquiry or the desire for deep understanding. It's more like a restless distraction, a tendency to see only in order to see and to have seen. It flits from one novelty to the next, seeking distraction and the new just for its own sake, without dwelling anywhere, without genuinely trying to understand.
Never staying with anything.
Exactly. It's a constant running away from truly awaiting or engaging with something. Think of restless channel surfing, or endlessly scrolling through news feeds, just consuming, never digesting. It's a flight into constant dispersed novelty, getting tangled up in the present without any grounding.
Okay, idle talk, curiosity. What else?
Third, ambiguity. That's right, to dictate. This is a state where everything seems known and understood, everything is apparently clear and accessible, because idle talk and curiosity have touched on everything. But in reality, nothing is truly grasped authentically.
So it looks like clarity, but it's actually hiding confusion.
Precisely. It conceals nothing, in the sense that everything is out there being talked about, but it simultaneously suppresses genuine being in the world in this uprooted everywhere and nowhere. We think we know what's going on, what people mean, but the underlying significance, the authentic possibilities, remain hidden or distorted.
Idle talk, curiosity, ambiguity, these are the mechanisms of falling prey.
They are the primary modes through which Dasein gets entangled and lost in the day. Dasein finds itself in a kind of groundless floating. This falling prey provides a kind of tranquilization.
Tranquilization, it calms us down.
In a way. By constantly offering new things, new topics for idle talk, new objects for curiosity, new apparent certainties through ambiguity, Day distracts Dasein from the difficult, unsettling task of confronting its own authentic possibilities, its finitude, its responsibility. It keeps Dasein occupied and prevents it from returning to itself.
And this leads to alienation.
Yes. Alienation from its own most potentiality of being, from what it truly could be if it weren't lost in the interpretations and distractions of the day. Again, this isn't necessarily a bad state, but it is the primary, everyday, inauthentic mode in which Dasein tends to exist.
It's sobering to think about. So here's a question for you listening. How do these three, idle talk, curiosity, and ambiguity, shape our understanding of the world and ourselves, especially today, in our age of constant information, endless feeds, and fleeting attention? How might they lead to a kind of superficial engagement with our own existence?
Recognizing these tendencies in ourselves and our culture is a crucial part of grappling with Heidegger's analysis. #7. Care is the unified being of Dasein.
We've covered a lot of ground here. Dasein's being in the world, its engagement with handy equipment, its fundamental being with others, often falling into the mode of the bay, its moods revealing thrownness, its understanding as projection, and this pervasive tendency towards falling prey through idle talk, curiosity, and ambiguity. These seem like distinct facets, though clearly interconnected.
They are deeply interconnected.
Is there something underlying all of this? Is there a single structure, a unifying principle, that brings all these different aspects of Dasein's being together into one coherent whole?
Yes, there is. Heidegger argues that care, Sorge, is the fundamental unified structure of Dasein's being.
Care. Sorge. Now, does he just mean caring about things, like worrying or being concerned?
That's the everyday meaning, the ontic understanding, but Sorge as an ontological structure is much broader and more fundamental. It's not just one emotion or activity among others, it's the very totality of Dasein's articulated being, the underlying unity of all the characteristics we've discussed.
The underlying unity. How does he formulate that?
He formally defines the structure of care as a threefold, yet unified structure. Each component reflects aspects we've already touched upon. 1. Being ahead of itself, sich vorweg. This points to Dasein's nature as project Entwurf. Dasein is always ahead of itself, projecting itself onto its possibilities, oriented towards its future potentiality for being.
Okay, the projection part of understanding.
Exactly. 2. Already being in a world, schon sein einer Welt. This captures Dasein's thrownness, Geworfenheit. Dasein always finds itself already situated, already in a specific world, with certain givens it hasn't chosen, the already in aspect.
Thrownness revealed by mood. Got it.
And 3, being alongside beings encountered within the world, bei sein, bei innerweltlich begegnendem. This refers to Dasein's everyday engagement with the things and people it encounters. This includes taking care of things, Versorgen, like using tools, dealing with equipment related to handiness, and also concern for others, Vorsorge, are ways of relating to other Dasein related to being with.
Being ahead, projection, already enthronedness, and being alongside, engagement.
Right. And these aren't separate pieces loosely connected. They are intrinsically interwoven, forming the single unified structure of Dasein's being, which is care. Care is the name for this whole dynamic structure.
That's a very specific technical meaning for care.
It is. And to show that this idea isn't just his invention but has deep roots, Heidegger actually refers to an old Roman fable, the Cura fable.
A fable? How does that fit in?
He uses it pre-ontologically to illustrate the structure he's uncovering. The story goes something like this. Cura Care was crossing a river and saw some clay. Thoughtfully, she started shaping it into a figure. Jupiter happened to come by, and Care asked him to give her creation spirit, which he did. Then a dispute arose over naming it. Care wanted to name it after herself, since she shaped it. Jupiter insisted it bear his name since he gave it spirit. Then Tellus Earth stepped forward, demanding her name be used, as she provided the body, the clay.
A three-way argument over naming rights.
Exactly. So they called on Saturn time to be the judge. Saturn delivered this verdict. Jupiter, spirit, would receive the spirit back at death. Tellus Earth would receive the body back. But because Cura first shaped this creature, Care shall possess it, watch over it, be concerned with it as long as it lives. And because of the dispute over the name, it shall be called Homo, human, because it is made from humus earth, clay.
Wow. So care possesses us throughout life.
That's the interpretation Heidegger draws from it. The fable suggests, in a pre-philosophical way, that care is fundamental to our being throughout our existence. This ontological structure of care, he argues, is ontologically prior to everyday phenomena like willing, wishing, desiring, addiction, inclination. Those are all modes or ways in which care manifests itself, but care is the underlying existential basis for them all.
So the fable isn't proof, but an illustration.
An illustration of a structure he believes he's uncovered through his phenomenological analysis. It points to this intrinsic connection between our being, homo, our finitude, returning spirit and body, our origins, humus, and this fundamental ongoing structure of care that defines our existence while we live. What does this fable suggest to you about this inherent link between being alive, being earthly, and being fundamentally constituted by this kind of caring or concerned engagement with the world and ourselves?
It suggests that being involved, being concerned, isn't optional. It's what we are for as long as we are. Okay, this concept of care as the fundamental unified structure of our being, this ahead of itself, already in, alongside beings, feels incredibly profound. It seems to capture the dynamic, engaged nature of our existence. But if care possesses us throughout life, what happens at life's ultimate boundary? What about the end? This brings us, inevitably, to another absolutely central, maybe the most profound and certainly often uncomfortable concept in being and time.
Death, indeed. Zanzim Todeming towards death.
And you mentioned earlier, here's where it gets really interesting, because Heidegger doesn't just treat death as, the biological event that happens at the end, something external that cuts life off. It's much more intrinsic, isn't it?
That's absolutely right. For Heidegger, being towards death is not primarily about the event of dying, the demise. It's an essential aspect of Dasein's being itself, and specifically, it's key to understanding Dasein's possibility of being a whole.
How can death make Dasein whole? That sounds paradoxical.
Because Dasein, in its everyday existence, is always incomplete, always projecting possibilities, always not yet finished. The question is, how can Dasein be grasped in its totality? Death, understood existentially, is what provides that potential boundary. He defines death as Dasein's ownmost non-relational possibility not to be bypassed.
Okay, let's break that down. Ownmost.
Ownmost. This is my death is uniquely mine. No one else can die my death for me. It singles Dasein out, brings it back to itself in the most radical way.
Non-relational.
Non-relational, clear, because death represents the possibility of the absolute impossibility of any further existence, the cutting off of all relations to the world, to others, to possibilities. In facing this possibility, Dasein is thrown back onto itself alone.
And not to be bypassed?
Not to be bypassed unüberholbar means it's unsurpassable, certain in its inevitability, though indefinite as to when, and it marks the uttermost limit of Dasein's possibilities. It's the possibility that cancels all other possibilities.
So death isn't just something waiting at the end, like a final chapter.
No, that's the crucial shift. Death is not like a fruit ripening and eventually falling off the tree, or a debt that eventually comes due. Dasein doesn't just have death waiting for it out there in the future. Dasein is already its not yet. Its finitude, its ending, is part of its being from the very beginning of its existence. We are, in our very mode of being, always projecting towards, relating to our own end. Death isn't just an ending to life. It's a way of being throughout life.
We are mortal beings through and through, not just at the end.
Exactly. Our mortality permeates our existence. And this is precisely where angst comes back in its most profound role.
Angst, not fear of dying, but anxiety in the face of being in the world.
Yes. Angst in this context is anxiety specifically about this ownmost non-relational possibility not to be bypassed death. It's not fear of the pain of dying or fear of what comes after. It's anxiety in the face of finitude itself. Angst reveals our thrownness into this ultimate possibility. It brings Dasein face to face with its absolute potentiality for being, which includes the potentiality for no longer being able to be there. It reveals our utter finitude and the uncanniness of our existence.
It strips away the everyday distractions and shows us our fundamental limit.
It does. However, what does everyday Dasein, lost in the day, do with death?
It avoids it, ignores it.
It certainly tries. The Dasein works constantly and diligently to conceal the authentic meaning of death. How? By flattening it into a public general event. It becomes something that happens to others.
The one dies phenomenon.
Exactly. One dies, people die. Death is just a part of life. It's treated as an unfortunate but commonplace occurrence that happens out there to them eventually. This communal, generalized interpretation serves to tranquilize Dasein.
It makes it less threatening, less personal.
Precisely. It allows Dasein to flee from its own authentic finitude. It promotes the illusion that I still have more time, that death is something for later, something that concerns the public, but not me, not yet, not in my unique singularity. This pervasive flight from finitude, this constant evasion of my own death, is a fundamental characteristic of inauthentic existence for Heidegger. It prevents us from grasping our own possibilities as finite possibilities.
It keeps us living as if we have infinite time, infinite possibility.
Which we don't. So here's a profound question for you. How does truly facing the inevitability of your own death, not death as a general concept, but your death in its absolute uniqueness and non-relationality, how might that change your understanding of your current life, its possibilities, its urgencies, its potential meaning?
It feels like it would force a reevaluation of everything, a call to live differently.
Okay, so if being towards death forces us, or at least gives us the possibility to confront our ownmost finitude, shattering the illusions of the they, is there something within Dasein that clears it towards this confrontation, towards living authentically in the face of this finitude, rather than remaining lost and tranquilized? You mentioned conscience earlier.
Yes. This brings us to Heidegger's interpretation of conscience-givism.
Conscience. Usually we think of that as our moral compass, right? The little voice telling us right from wrong may be connected to God or societal rules.
That's the common understanding. But Heidegger, again, reinterprets it existentially, detaching it initially from specific moral codes or external authorities. For him, conscience is not primarily an external voice, nor is it just psychological guilt feelings. Fundamentally, the call of conscience is Dasein calling itself.
Dasein calling itself. How does that work? It's a silent call. It doesn't shout instructions or give specific information, do this, don't do that. It doesn't speak in the mode of idle talk. Its speech is silence. It calls Dasein forth, summons it away from its lostness in they, and towards its own most potentiality for being, towards facing itself. It's a disclosure, an uncovering of Dasein to itself.
A silent call to become oneself.
Yes, and to understand this summons, to truly hear the call of conscience, is to understand Dasein's own primordial potentiality for being, to recognize its capacity for authenticity, its need to take ownership of its existence.
Okay. And what does this call reveal? What does Dasein hear when it calls itself?
This is one of the most challenging and often misunderstood parts of being and time. The call of conscience calls Dasein to its potentiality for being, but it calls Dasein as guilty, schuldig.
Guilty. So it is about wrongdoing after all.
No, and this is absolutely crucial. Heidegger insists this being guilty, schuldig sein, is not primarily a moral concept in the everyday sense. It's not about having transgressed a law or violated a commandment or failed ethically. It's an existential determination. It's a fundamental structure of Dasein's being.
An existential guilt. How can we be guilty just by existing?
Being guilty, in this ontological sense, means Dasein is being the ground of a nullity.
Being the ground of a nullity. Okay, that sounds very abstract. Let's break that down.
Right. Remember, Dasein is always a throne project. Throne means it finds itself already in existence with a basis, a ground, that it did not choose for itself. It didn't create itself, didn't choose its basic situation. So its ground has a certain nullity or lack built into it. It's not self-caused.
Okay, so we're grounded in something we didn't choose. That's the nullity of thrownness.
That's part of it. And then, remember, Dasein is also projective. It projects itself onto possibilities. But in choosing one possibility, in committing to one path, it necessarily negates or chooses against countless other possibilities. Every yes to one thing is implicitly a no to many others. This act of choosing against, of leaving aside, generates another kind of not, another nullity.
So in projecting possibilities, we're always creating knots, always closing off other paths.
Exactly. Because Dasein is finite, its projection is always selective, always involves negation. This nullity isn't a moral failing. It's inherent in the structure of finite freedom and choice. Dasein is always lacking, always incomplete because it's this throne project, never fully self-sufficient, always having possibilities it hasn't actualized, always having a ground it didn't lay itself. That is the meaning of existential being guilty, being the basis for this inherent negativity, this structural lack or debt, can also mean debt, that constitutes its finite being.
So conscience calls us to face this fundamental guilt, this inherent lack and responsibility.
Precisely. The call summons Dasein to acknowledge this structural guilt. And wanting to have a conscience, for Heidegger, signifies Dasein's authentic possibility. It means choosing to hear the call, choosing to take over one's thrownness, and choosing to accept this fundamental being guilty as part of one's own being. It's about resolutely taking responsibility for one's existence as this finite throne ground of nullity, rather than evading it in the they.
It's about owning our finitude and our choices, including the possibilities we negate.
Yes, it's taking responsibility for the not that is inherent in our being. So here's a thought. If guilt in this deep sense is an inherent structural part of our existence as finite, choosing being's not just a moral failing we can erase, how does that shift our understanding of personal responsibility and freedom?
It makes responsibility seem less about achieving perfection and more about owning our inherent imperfections, our limitations, our necessary choices, and their consequences. A much heavier but maybe more realistic kind of freedom. Okay, so we have being towards death confronting us with our ultimate finitude, and the silent call of conscience summoning us to take responsibility for our inherent being guilty as throne projects.
It sounds like Dasein is being called out of its lostness in the day, called towards a different way of living. What does this authentic existence actually look like? How does it manifest in practice?
Authentic existence, Eigentlichkeit, meaning ownness or self-possession, finds its core characteristic in what Heidegger calls anticipatory resoluteness, for laufende Entschlossenheit.
Anticipatory resoluteness, that sounds like a key concept. It is. This is the authentic mode of Dasein's being a whole, its way of existing in full awareness of its structure. It involves two key things we've just discussed. First, it means resolutely taking over being guilty. This is the resoluteness part.
Yeah.
Entschlossenheit, which also means being unclosed or open. It means accepting one's thrownness, acknowledging oneself as the ground of that inherent nullity, taking responsibility for one's choices within that finite situation, rather than blaming circumstances or conforming blindly to the they.
Owning the guilt, the nullity. Okay.
Second, it involves anticipating one's own most death. This is the anticipatory part, Vorlaufende. It means living in constant, clear-sighted awareness of that own most non-relational possibility not to be bypassed finitude. Not morbidly dwelling on death, but letting the awareness of finitude inform one's choices, freeing Dasein from the illusions of the day and opening it up to its genuine finite possibilities.
So anticipatory resoluteness is this unified stance of facing finitude and taking responsibility for one's throne, choosing existence.
Exactly. It's a decisive, engaged, unflinching way of being, holding oneself open to the call of conscience and the truth of one's finitude. Authentic thinking about death isn't morbid fear. It's part of this resolute openness, this wanting to have a conscience that is transparent to itself, facing its ultimate limit without evasion. It's about genuinely choosing oneself in one's finitude.
And does this change how we experience the present moment? You mentioned earlier that the they gets lost in curiosity, flitting from now to now.
Yes, absolutely. Within authentic anticipatory resoluteness, the ordinary fleeting present transforms into what Heidegger calls the Moment der Augenblick, literally the glance of the eye.
The moment, Augenblick. What's special about it?
It's not just another now in an endless sequence. The moment is a point of vision, a resolute raptness. It's an intensely engaged presence where Dasein truly encounters the unique possibilities and concrete circumstances of its situation. It's a present that isn't isolated, but is held firmly within the dynamic unity of the future, projecting authentic possibilities based on finitude, and the having been, drawing authentically on one's thrownness and past. It's where decisive action, authentic choice, becomes possible.
So it's a focused, decisive present, connected to past and future.
Precisely. It stands in stark contrast to the dispersed, distracted, making present of curiosity, which just flits from one thing to another, fleeing genuine engagement and decision. The moment is a gathering, a concentration of Dasein's being in its situation, allowing for authentic response.
This sounds like a completely different way of experiencing, well, everything. It's a total reordering. And you're suggesting, I think, that this authentic existence, this living in anticipatory resoluteness and experiencing the moment, is fundamentally tied to our understanding of time itself.
That's the ultimate destination of this part of the analysis, yes.
So if I'm getting this incredible idea right, time isn't just this neutral container, this objective river flowing past us independently. Instead, somehow, we are time. Our very being, our care structure, is temporal.
You've articulated it beautifully. That is the core revelation. Zeitlichkeit is the ontological meaning of care. It's not just a feature of Dasein. It is the very ground, the underlying unifying structure of Dasein's entire being.
Temporality is the meaning of care. Wow.
All those phenomena we've painstakingly unpacked. Being in the world, understanding his projection, attunement revealing thrownness, falling prey, being towards death, conscience, resoluteness, care itself, they are all rooted in and made possible by Dasein's fundamental temporality.
Okay, so what is this fundamental temporality? Is it like clock time?
No, absolutely not. Heidegger makes a radical distinction between primordial temporality and what he calls the vulgar concept of time.
Primordial versus vulgar time.
Oh, primordial temporality, the temporality that is Dasein's being, is fundamentally finite and ecstatic.
Ecstatic? Like blissful?
No, not in that sense. Ecstatic here comes from the Greek ekstasis, meaning standing outside oneself. Dasein's temporality is ecstatic because Dasein, in its very being, is always outside itself, reaching towards its past, present, and future. Temporality has three interconnected ecstasies.
Okay, the three ecstasies.
1. Future. Zukunft. Dasein is fundamentally constituted by coming towards itself from its possibilities. It's always ahead of itself, projecting, anticipating, especially anticipating death in authentic existence. Heidegger argues the future is the primary ecstasy, the main directional orientation of Dasein. 2. Having been, past, Gewissenheit. Dasein is its past, but not as something left behind. It comes back to its thrownness, its heritage, taking it up in its projections. Interestingly, he argues the having been arises from the future, meaning our past becomes significant and is disclosed to us in light of the possibilities we project. We retrieve our past based on our future orientation. 3. Present, Gainsford. This is the making present where Dasein encounters beings within the world, allowing them to be relevant. In authentic existence, this becomes the moment, Vogelblick, the resolute encounter with the situation.
Future, having been present. And these aren't separate points on the line.
Not at all. They are intrinsically unified, constantly originating from and referring back to each other in a dynamic interplay. Dasein temporalizes itself by stretching along these three ecstasies simultaneously. It is this stretching along.
That's primordial, finite, ecstatic temporality. What's the vulgar concept then?
The vulgar concept of time is our everyday common sense understanding. Time as an infinite succession of nows, like points on a line, beads on a string. Think of clock time, calendar time, one moment passing, then the next, stretching endlessly forward and backward.
That sounds like normal time?
It's what we normally operate with, yes. But Heidegger argues this is a level down inauthentic temporality. It's derived from primordial, finite temporality, but it loses the ecstatic, finite, unified character.
How does it arise? Why do we think of time this way?
He suggests it arises from Dasein's flight from finitude and its lostness in the they. By focusing on an endless series of indifferent replaceable nows, we can evade the unique urgency of our own finite existence, the decisiveness required by authentic possibilities. It allows us to think there's always more time, avoiding the confrontation with our own most end. It objectifies time, making it seem like something out there rather than the structure of our own being.
So clock time covers over our real, finite, ecstatic temporality.
It derives from it, but covers over its primordial meaning. And this understanding of temporality profoundly grounds historicity, Geschichtlichkeit.
Historicity. Our being in history.
Not just being in history like being in a container. Historicity is Dasein's very mode of being because it is temporal in this ecstatic way. Our individual fate, our authentic historical path, and our collective destiny, our shared historical occurrence with others, are grounded in how Dasein stretches along future, having been, and present. Our history isn't just a sequence of past events, it's how our having been shapes our present and future possibilities.
And even world time, the time of the world itself.
Yes, the world itself temporalizes, along with Dasein's temporality. The meaningful world isn't just sitting there objectively in space. It shows up, becomes present, recedes in the ecstatic temporalizing of Dasein. He makes the radical claim. If no Dasein exists, then no world is there in this disclosed, meaningful sense. Time isn't external. It is our way of being, the way a world is disclosed.
Mind-blowing. So if time is primarily this finite, ecstatic dimension of your being, not an infinite, objective container just flowing by, how does that redefine your relationship to your own past, present, and future?
It makes them intrinsic dynamic structures of your existence, structures you are responsible for taking up authentically or inauthentically. It puts your finite time right at the core of your being. Hashtag 11, truth, reality, and the ultimate question.
What an absolutely incredible journey we've taken. We started from that almost forgotten question of being, and we've traversed Dasein's unique structure, this being for whom being matters. It's being in the world, it's being with others, often lost in the they. Its attunement and understanding is falling prey, the unifying structure of care, its essential finitude in being towards death, the call of conscience revealing being guilty, and finally, this profound possibility of authentic existence through anticipatory resoluteness grounded in ecstatic, finite temporality.
It's a complex architecture of existence he lays out.
It really is. So bringing it all together, how does this entire analysis fundamentally reorient our understanding of those bedrock philosophical concepts we started with, concepts like truth and reality? What happens to those age-old questions about what's real and what's true?
They get completely reframed, turned inside out, really, from their traditional interpretations. Our whole phenomenological investigation, starting from Dasein, reveals that truth-Wahrheit is primarily disclosedness or unconcealment aletheia, which happens in and through Dasein.
So truth isn't primarily about statements matching facts anymore.
That kind of truth, propositional truth, correctness, is a derivative mode, according to Heidegger. It's founded upon the more primordial truth, which is the event of unconcealment, the disclosure of beings that occurs within Dasein's existence. Only because Dasein exists as fundamentally constituted by disclosedness, through its understanding, its attunement, its being that there is clearing, can something like being be understood at all, and only then can there be truth in any sense.
So Dasein's existence is the condition for truth.
Yes. This leads him to that really radical claim. There is being, capital B, only insofar as truth, as unconcealment is, and truth is only as long as Dasein exists. Being and truth are equiprimordially. They arise together.
Wow. Being depends on Dasein's disclosing existence. It sounds very anti-realist.
It sounds that way, but it's subtle. He's talking about the meaning or disclosure of being, not necessarily the existence of brute beings independent of Dasein. But yes, being as meaningful presence and truth as disclosure are tied fundamentally to Dasein's existence. Truth isn't something passively found out there. It's this active, dynamic process of unconcealment bound up with our very being. So think again. How does shifting from a truth of agreement to a truth of unconcealment, an event of disclosure, change what you consider to be genuinely known or true? It makes truth something that has to be actively achieved and maintained in openness.
It makes truth feel much more alive and maybe more fragile. Okay, what about reality? What about the existence of the external world, that classic philosophical problem?
That whole traditional problem gets dissolved or shown to be fundamentally misguided. The question, is there an external world, or how can we prove the reality of the external world, is, for Heidegger, senseless if it's asked by Dasein and understood as being in the world.
Why senseless?
Because Dasein is always already outside itself, involved with the world, familiar with beings within it. To ask for a proof of the world assumes you start from an isolated subject, a mind trapped in a box, that somehow has to build a bridge to an outside. But Dasein isn't an isolated subject. Its fundamental constitution is being in the world. The world isn't external in that sense. It's the horizon of Dasein's own being.
So the question assumes a separation that isn't primordially there.
Exactly. The reality of interworldly beings, tables, chairs, trees, becomes comprehensible only through the phenomenon of the world itself, which in turn is rooted in Dasein's fundamental constitution. Care, understood as temporality. The world is disclosed with Dasein's temporalizing existence.
So those traditional proofs for the external world were trying to solve a pseudo-problem.
That's Heidegger's view. He launches a really strong critique of these proofs. He argues that such proofs are only expected and attempted because philosophers start from an ontologically insufficient way of positing what needs proving. Namely, they start with an isolated consciousness or subject whose being hasn't been clarified. Dasein, understood correctly, already is, in its very being, what these proofs are trying and failing to demonstrate after the fact. The real scandal of philosophy, he says, isn't that these proofs are lacking or haven't succeeded.
What is the scandal then?
The scandal is that philosophers keep expecting and attempting such proofs. It shows they haven't grasped the fundamental phenomenon of being in the world.
So does this make him an idealist? Someone who thinks reality is just mind-dependent?
He actually says idealism has a fundamental priority over realism, but only if idealism is understood correctly. If idealism means recognizing that being itself can never be explained by beings, like minds or subjects, but is always already the transcendental condition for encountering any being, then yes, idealism points towards the right, problematic the priority of the question of being over questions about beings.
But not if idealism just reduces everything to a mind or consciousness.
Right. If idealism just reduces all beings to a subject or consciousness whose own being remains unexamined, then it's just as ontologically naive as a crude realism that thinks reality is just a collection of objectively present things. The reality of the world and the things in it is grounded in Dasein's being in the world, in care, in temporality. The world is real because Dasein is being in the world. #outro.
Wow. What an absolutely phenomenal deep dive. We started by just acknowledging that huge forgotten question, the meaning of being. And we've navigated through Dasein as this unique starting point. It's being in the world, the crucial role of handiness versus objective presence, the social dimension of being with and the pervasive influence of the they, the importance of mood and attunement revealing thrownness, understanding as projection within the hermeneutic circle, the ways we fall prey through idle talk, curiosity, ambiguity, the unifying structure of care, the existential significance of being towards death, the call of conscience and existential guilt, and finally, the possibility of authentic existence through anticipatory resoluteness grounded in finite, ecstatic temporality, which reframes even truth and reality.
It's a dense network of interconnected concepts, all trying to illuminate that central question.
It really is. So what does this all mean, ultimately, for us living our lives right now? It feels like this whole deep dive wasn't just about, defining Heidegger's terms or understanding a complicated book chapter by chapter. It was about grasping or beginning to grasp a radically different way to approach the very question of what it means to be. see. It shifts the focus away from just looking at objective things out there and turns it towards the profound, dynamic, finite, temporal being of Dasein itself towards ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And perhaps that leaves us with a final provocative thought, something that ties many of these threads together and invites you, the listener, to continue this deep dive in your own existence.
Okay, what's the thought?
This raises an important question. If our fundamental way of being, as Dasein, is this structure called care, encompassing our thrownness, our projection of possibilities, our engagement with the world and others, and if the deep meaning of this care is rooted ultimately in our finitude, being towards death, and our unique ecstatic temporality, then what responsibilities does this understanding place on you right now? How does it challenge you regarding how you choose to live your finite time in this shared world? How does it call upon you to engage with your own potential for authentic existence, for truly becoming yourself amidst the constant pull and noise of the they? A profound question indeed. How do we live authentically in the face of our finite, caring, temporal being? Something to keep unpacking long after this conversation ends. The inquiry continues.